Picture this. It's 3 a.m. A mother hears her daughter scream. She runs down the hallway, but the bedroom door won't open. Something's blocking it from the inside. When she finally forces her way through, she finds him standing over her child's bed, holding a knife. And what he says next will make your blood run cold. Before we dive into this story, I need to ask you something. Do you believe evil is something you're born with, or something you become? Because what happened in the quiet town of Sherrill, New York, will make you question everything you think you know about the nature of evil itself. This is the story of Lauren Belius, a 6-year-old girl who loved animals, practiced taekwondo, and once grew her hair long just so she could donate it to children with cancer. A little girl whose bright eyes and boundless energy lit up every room she entered. But in the final 48 hours of her life, something changed. Lauren stopped speaking. She stopped playing. She could only stare at one person in her home with absolute terror in her eyes. And when her mother asked what was wrong, Lauren couldn't say a word. She could only look at him. 2 days later, Lauren was dead, and the man responsible would claim he was commanded by God. But here's what the courtroom would never fully answer. Was he insane, or was he the most manipulative predator you've ever heard of? A man who destroyed evidence, planned every detail, and then convinced 4 psychiatrists he was crazy. This case divided a community. It exposed cracks in our justice system, and it left one mother fighting a battle that continues to this day. More than a decade later, let me take you to Sherrill, New York. Population just over 3,000 people. It proudly calls itself the smallest city in the state. This is the kind of place where neighbors wave from their porches, where the biggest news story might be about the high school football team, where people leave their doors unlocked at night, and children's bicycles stay on front lawns without a second thought. It's a community where the rhythm of life is gentle, predictable, and safe. Located in Oneida County in central New York, Sherrill sits nestled among other small communities that form the backbone of rural American life. The city was incorporated in 1916, built around the Oneida community's silverware manufacturing operations. For generations, this was a place where people worked hard, raised families, and knew their neighbors by name. The main street features the kinds of businesses you'd expect. A family-owned diner where regulars have their booth, a hardware store where the owner remembers what you bought last month, a library where the same librarian has been stamping books for 30 years. There's a sense of continuity here, of tradition, of safety in familiarity. Children ride their bikes to school. Parents coach Little League on weekends. The annual 4th of July parade is the social event of the summer, with fire trucks decorated in red, white, and blue, local politicians waving from convertibles, and the high school band marching in formation. This is America at its most idealistic, a place that seems frozen in a simpler time, or at least it was, because in July 2011, something would happen that would shatter that illusion forever. Something so horrific that it would force this small community to confront a darkness they never imagined could exist within their borders. It was here, in this quiet haven, that a little girl with bright eyes and a boundless spirit was growing up. Her name was Lauren Sylvia Belius. Born on September 16, 2004, Lauren was a vibrant part of her family from the beginning. She shared an inseparable bond with her identical twin sister, Erica, 2 souls who shared the same womb, the same DNA, the same first breath. They were each other's built-in best friend, each other's mirror. Identical twins share something the rest of us can barely understand. They finish each other's sentences. They feel each other's pain. They have an intuitive connection that borders on the mystical. Lauren and Erica had that bond. They could communicate with a glance, could sense when the other was upset, could make each other laugh with an inside joke no one else understood. They dressed alike sometimes, delighting in confusing their teachers. They developed their own secret language when they were toddlers, a twin phenomenon known as cryptophagia. They were individuals, yes, but also two halves of an extraordinary whole. Lauren also had an older brother, Nolan, who she adored, and parents who loved her beyond measure, Allison and John Belius. To anyone who knew her, Lauren was a whirlwind of activity and passion. She chased soccer balls across fields with fierce determination, her ponytail bouncing as she ran. She practiced ballet with focus and grace, learning to hold positions that made her muscles burn, and she was working her way toward a green belt in Taekwondo, attending classes twice a week at a local dojo. Her Taekwondo instructor, Master Kim, would later tell reporters that Lauren had the heart of a warrior. She never quit. If she failed a technique during class, couldn't quite get her kick high enough or her stance strong enough, she would stay after and practice again and again until she got it right. She had that rare combination of natural athleticism and relentless determination. But Lauren's passions went beyond sports. She had a remarkable love for all living creatures. She would sit for hours playing with the family pets, a dog named Buddy and two cats, Whiskers and Mittens. Convinced they understood every word she said, she would create elaborate scenarios, assigning them roles in her imaginary games, speaking to them in that earnest way children have when the line between fantasy and reality is beautifully blurred. When she found an injured bird in the backyard, she insisted on nursing it back to health. She created a little nest in a shoebox, researched what baby birds ate, and carefully fed it with an eyedropper. When it finally flew away, she cried, not from sadness, but from joy that she'd helped it return to the sky where it belonged. Lauren talked about becoming a veterinarian. When she grew up, she wanted to help animals, to heal them, to make sure no creature suffered if she could prevent it. It was a dream born from genuine empathy, the kind of calling that, if nurtured, could have led to a lifetime of meaningful work. And when Lauren was just 6 years old, she did something that perfectly captured who she was. She grew her hair long, not because she wanted long hair, but so she could donate it to Locks of Love, an organization that provides hairpieces to children suffering from medical hair loss. Think about that for a moment. A 6-year-old child, understanding the quiet power of giving, of sacrifice. She sat through months of tangles and extra time brushing. She endured the summer heat with hair past her shoulders, all because she knew that somewhere another child was suffering and she could help. Most adults never think to do something like that, but Lauren did. She sat in that salon chair and smiled as the hairdresser gathered her hair into a ponytail and made the first cut. She smiled because she knew her hair would make someone else happy. That level of empathy and selflessness at 6 years old is extraordinary. Her teachers described her as bright, curious, always raising her hand with questions. She loved reading time, especially stories about animals. She was learning to write in cursive and was proud of how neat she could make her letters when she really concentrated. She had friends, of course, birthday parties with cake and games, sleepovers where the girls stayed up too late, giggling about nothing and everything, playdates at the park where they'd take over the swings and the jungle gym, creating elaborate games only they understood. This was Lauren. This was the little girl whose life we're about to chronicle. I want you to see her clearly, not as a victim, not as a statistic, but as a real child with dreams and fears and favorite foods and songs she sang off-key, because what happened to her matters, and she deserves to be remembered as more than just the tragedy that befell her. In 2009, when Lauren and Erica were just 4 years old, their parents made the difficult decision to divorce. It wasn't dramatic, just two people who couldn't make their marriage work. There were no affairs, no major betrayals, just the slow realization that they wanted different things from life and were making each other unhappy in the process. A shared custody arrangement was quickly established, and the children adapted with remarkable resilience. Both parents remained deeply involved. They showed up to soccer games and ballet recitals. They made sure birthdays were celebrated. They communicated about homework, and doctor's appointments. They put their children first. John Belius got the kids every other weekend and alternating holidays. He made those weekends special. Trips to the park, movies, special dinners. He wanted them to know that even though he and their mother were no longer together, his love for them hadn't diminished by a single degree. For a while, it worked. The kids adjusted. They had 2 homes, yes, but they were loved in both. In the grand scheme of divorce, theirs was relatively amicable and functional. In the quiet streets of Sharrow, the future still seemed to hold nothing but promise. No one could have possibly imagined the shadow that was about to fall. Following her divorce, Allison Belius threw herself into her children and her career. She worked as a nursing supervisor at a nursing home in nearby Rome, New York. It was demanding work, long hours, difficult patients, the constant weight of being responsible for people's well-being. But she was good at it. She was building a stable, loving home for her 3 kids on her own terms. She wasn't looking for a relationship. She'd been burned by divorce and was focused on providing stability for Lauren, Erica, and Nolan. Romance was the last thing on her mind, but in June of 2009, she met someone at work who would change everything. His name was David Tribble Cox. He was 36 years old, a certified nursing assistant at the same facility where Allison worked. For several months, their relationship was purely platonic, built on shared work experiences. They talked during breaks. They commiserated about difficult patients, about the challenges of understaffing, about the bureaucratic headaches that come with healthcare work. There was nothing romantic about it. David seemed like a decent enough guy, quiet, a bit awkward socially, but not in a threatening way. He did his job competently, showed up on time, the kind of coworker who blends into the background. Unremarkable, forgettable even. But by February 2010, something had shifted. David revealed a different side, charming, attentive, seemingly thoughtful. To Allison, he appeared to be a kind and gentle man, someone who understood her challenges as a single mother. Because he listened without judgment, he started bringing her coffee in the morning, remembering how she liked it. He offered to cover shifts when she needed time off for the kids' activities. He complimented her, not in a creepy way, but in a way that made her feel seen, appreciated. And then he asked her out. Just coffee, he said, no pressure. She hesitated. Workplace romances could get messy, and she had her kids to think about. But something about his earnestness convinced her to give it a chance. That first coffee date turned into dinner. Dinner turned into regular dates. And gradually, despite her reservations, Allison found herself in a relationship. But here's what's chilling in retrospect. David asked about her kids constantly. He wanted to see pictures. He remembered their names and activities. He asked detailed questions about their personalities, their schedules, their routines. At the time, this seemed sweet. What single mother doesn't want a partner who's interested in her children? It felt like he was trying to understand her whole life, not just the parts of her he saw at work. Looking back, those questions take on a much darker tone. Was he genuinely interested, or was he gathering intelligence? Was he identifying which child might be most vulnerable? Was he already planning something unspeakable? We'll never know for certain, but the pattern is one that experts in predatory behavior recognize immediately. Predators often show excessive interest in children. They want details, they want access, and they groom the parents just as carefully as they groom the children. David didn't just date Allison, he embraced her family. From the beginning, he went on shopping trips with them to the grocery store, helping push the cart and keep the kids entertained. He joined them for family dinners, sitting at the table and asking about everyone's day. He taught the children how to fish, taking them to a nearby lake on summer weekends. Picture those summer afternoons by a quiet lake, the sun warm on their faces, Lauren squealing with delight when she felt a tug on her line, him patiently showing her how to reel it in, his hands over hers on the rod, the pride on her face when she finally landed that first fish, a small sunfish that seemed enormous to her 6-year-old eyes. He took photos of these moments. He posted them on social media with captions about his kids and being blessed. To anyone looking at his Facebook page, he was a family man, a guy who'd found love and was embracing the whole package. From the outside, he was the picture of a perfect partner. The children seemed to adore him. He played board games with them, read bedtime stories doing funny voices for different characters, treated them as if they were his own flesh and blood. Neighbors would later recall seeing David helping Lauren with homework at the kitchen table, both of them bent over her workbook. They saw him pushing Erica on swings at the local playground, going higher and higher as she shrieked with laughter. They saw him tossing a football with Nolan in the backyard. He seemed genuinely invested in these children's lives. And to Allison, exhausted from the demands of single motherhood and a demanding career, his help was a godsend. In December 2010, David moved into Allison's home on Primo Avenue in Sharrow. This was a significant step, a declaration that this relationship was serious, long-term. He would be there every day, every night. His presence completed the picture of a happy, blended family. For Allison, it felt like a new beginning. After the pain of divorce, after the lonely nights, and the overwhelming responsibility of raising 3 kids alone, she had found a supportive partner who not only loved her, but genuinely loved her children, or so she thought. David had successfully integrated himself into the fabric of their daily lives. He was at soccer games, cheering from the sidelines, at ballet recitals, recording videos on his phone, helping with homework, making sure it was done before dinner, making dinner himself sometimes. Nothing fancy but edible and made with apparent care. He was, to all appearances, the helpful stepdad, the guy who stepped up, the guy who didn't run from the responsibility of dating a woman with 3 kids. But beneath this carefully constructed facade, something else was hiding, something malignant and patient. For a time, life appeared stable, even happy. But as 2010 turned into 2011, cracks began to appear, small at first, easy to rationalize or ignore. David became moodier. He'd snap over small things, the dish left in the sink, noise when he was trying to watch TV. Then he'd apologize profusely, claiming work stress or lack of sleep. The cycle would repeat. He started spending more time on his computer, always angling the screen away when someone walked by. When Allison asked what he was doing, he'd say work stuff or just browsing, but his body language screamed defensiveness. And then came the revelation that would change everything. The first major fissure came when the family started planning a vacation to Florida. The kids were thrilled. They'd never been to Disney World, and Allison had been saving for this trip. She showed them brochures. They picked out which rides they wanted to go on. It was all they could talk about at dinner. But as plans became concrete, booking flights, reserving hotels, David grew strangely hesitant. He would change the subject, find excuses to leave conversations about the trip. When Allison would bring up dates or ask him to request time off work, he'd become evasive or irritable. Allison pressed him for an explanation. They were supposed to be a family now. Why wouldn't he want to go? Why was he acting so strange? What he revealed was shocking. He couldn't go to Florida because he feared being arrested there. The reason? A past sexual encounter with a 12-year-old girl when he was 19 years old. Let that sink in. The man who had been tucking her children into bed every night, the man who had taught her 6-year-old daughter to fish, who had pushed her on swings, who had helped with homework and been alone with her kids countless times, had a history of sexual contact with a child. Allison's world tilted. This man she thought she knew was a stranger, and a dangerous one. She demanded details. How did it happen? Was he charged? Did he do time? David claimed it was a mistake from his past, that the girl had looked older, that he'd pleaded to a lesser charge, and gotten probation, that he'd done his time and moved on. But Florida, he said, had different laws. If he went there, old warrants might surface. He could be arrested. Whether any of this was true or just another lie, we may never know, but the admission itself was damning. But the confessions didn't stop there. Once the dam broke, more came flooding out. He admitted to having a sex addiction, to being unfaithful during their relationship, to visiting websites he shouldn't have been on. And he warned her that if anyone discovered his online activities, he would be in serious trouble. The implication was clear. Something shameful and potentially illegal was on his computer. Allison was reeling. Every revelation was worse than the last. Who was this person she'd let into her home, into her children's lives? She should have kicked him out immediately. She knows that now, but in the moment, she hesitated. He was crying, begging for forgiveness, promising to get help, swearing he would never hurt her or the kids. He made her feel like she'd be cruel to abandon him. When he was finally being honest about his demons, it's easy to judge from the outside, to say you'd have acted differently. But manipulation is a powerful thing, and Allison, exhausted and overwhelmed, didn't yet see the full picture. Alongside these verbal admissions, David's behavior became increasingly erratic. His moods would swing wildly. One moment affectionate and apologetic, the next sullen and distant. He'd withdraw for days, barely speaking, then suddenly be overly attentive in a way that felt forced and unsettling. And then there was the Bible. Seemingly overnight, David became religious. He began carrying a Bible everywhere, clutching it like a talisman. It went with him to the bathroom, to the dinner table, to bed. But here's what Allison noticed. He never actually opened it. He would sit with it in his lap, eyes distant, staring at nothing, but never turn the pages, never reference verses, never pray aloud, never go to church, never talk about faith or God or spiritual growth. It was a prop, a hollow performance of piety that felt deeply unsettling. When Allison asked about this sudden religiosity, David would say vague things about finding God or needing guidance, but it didn't feel genuine. It felt like a costume he was trying on, or a shield he was holding up. Allison was deeply concerned by these red flags. She saw a troubled man whose instability was straining their relationship. She was seriously considering asking him to leave, but she didn't yet see a monster. She couldn't imagine he would harm one of her babies. She thought the danger he posed was to himself or to her emotionally, but not to her children, not physically. That failure of imagination would haunt her forever. In July 2011, everything was about to explode. The last weekend of Lauren's life began as many others had. On Sunday, July 17, 2011, Lauren, Erica, and Nolan returned to their mother's home. After spending the weekend with their father, John, they'd had a good weekend. Swimming, a cookout, movies. John had dropped them off around 6 p.m., hugged them goodbye, and driven away. He had no idea he'd never see Lauren alive again. But this time, something was different. The moment the kids walked through the door, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Allison could feel it. David was agitated, pacing. Shortly after the children returned, David asked Allison to marry him. Think about the context. He had just confessed to a sexual encounter with a child, to infidelity, to illegal content on his computer. His behavior had been increasingly disturbing. They'd been fighting, and now he was asking her to marry him. There was no ring, no romantic setup, just him blurting out the question in the kitchen while she was making dinner. For Allison, the answer was immediate. Given everything he had revealed, given her growing unease, marrying him was absolutely out of the question. She declined his proposal firmly. She told him she thought he needed help, that she wasn't sure their relationship could continue, and that rejection acted as a switch, flipping the dynamic into something terrifyingly unnerving. David's face changed. The mask slipped completely. There was rage there, simmering just below the surface, but also something else, something cold and calculating. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just nodded slowly and walked away. That should have been the moment Allison called the police, packed the kids in the car, and drove to her parents' house, changed the locks, anything. But she didn't, because he hadn't technically done anything, and a part of her still couldn't believe he was truly dangerous. The most immediate change after David's rejected proposal was in 6-year-old Lauren. The bubbly, active girl suddenly vanished. In her place was a child who was silent and visibly frightened. She stopped speaking entirely, stopped playing. That constant motion that defined her, the running, the jumping, the boundless energy, was completely extinguished. It was as if someone had reached inside her and switched off her light. Allison noticed immediately. This wasn't a normal childhood upset. This wasn't a tantrum or a mood. This was raw primal fear, the kind that silences you completely because speaking feels too dangerous. When Allison asked what was wrong, Lauren wouldn't utter a word. She would just shake her head, eyes wide, but then she would lift her eyes and look directly, fearfully at David. It was a silent, desperate signal. Look at him, her eyes said. He's the danger. Please see, please understand, please protect me. Allison could see the fear, could see where Lauren's eyes went every time, could see how her daughter would shrink back when David entered a room, how she'd position herself behind furniture, creating barriers, how she'd grab Erica's hand and hold on tight. But Allison couldn't yet fully interpret what it meant, what had happened, what had he done. She pulled Lauren aside, knelt down to her level. Baby, you can tell me anything. Did someone hurt you? Did David do something? But Lauren just stared, tears rolling down her cheeks, unable or unwilling to form words. Looking back, Allison is tortured by these moments. Was Lauren trying to tell her? Was she screaming for help in the only way she knew how? And did Allison fail to hear it? David's behavior became even more bizarre. During those final 48 hours, he approached Lauren multiple times. Even as she tried to shrink away, he would kneel down and tell her she was special, that one day she was going to be famous, that people would talk about her. Famous. What did that mean? Those words would acquire a truly horrific meaning in just hours. He told Erica that Lauren was going to be famous, but she wouldn't. Why single out one twin? What was he trying to communicate? The warning signs were everywhere now. They weren't subtle. They were air raid sirens. Allison could feel that sense of impending disaster sitting in her gut like a stone. She called her mother, saying something felt wrong. She called her sister. Watch the kids tomorrow, she said. I think I need to tell David to leave. But tomorrow never came for Lauren. Monday, July 18th, was the last full day of Lauren's life. She spent it mostly in her room, occasionally emerging to eat or use the bathroom, but saying nothing. Erica tried to engage her in play, but Lauren just shook her head. That evening, Allison tucked both girls into their bunk beds, Erica on the bottom, Lauren on top. She kissed them goodnight, turned on the nightlight, and closed the door. She had no idea it was the last time she'd ever do that routine with both her daughters. The early hours of July 19, 2011, started like any other night. The house was quiet, dark, everyone in bed, but at approximately 3:30 a.m., that silence shattered. Allison was jolted awake by a sound that would echo in her nightmares forever. A scream, Erica's voice, cutting through the darkness with the kind of terror that bypasses your brain and goes straight to your primal instincts. In an instant, Allison was out of bed, sprinting down the hallway. Her heart was already racing, adrenaline flooding her system. Every maternal instinct screamed that her child was in danger. When she reached the girl's bedroom door, she grabbed the handle and pulled, but it wouldn't open. Something was blocking it from the inside. Panic set in immediately. She pulled harder, called out to her daughters, Lauren, Erica, open the door. No response, just silence. A silence somehow worse than the scream. She could hear something, movement, a shuffling sound, but no voices. She threw her shoulder against the door, again and again, with a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength. She forced it open just enough to squeeze through. The dresser had been pushed against the door. She had to shove it aside, scraping it across the floor, and then she was inside. What she saw would replay in her mind every day, for the rest of her life. David Tribble Cox stood by the top bunk where Lauren slept. In his hand was a knife from their kitchen, a large chef's knife with an 8-inch blade. Lauren was lying in her bed, her small body still, blood visible even in the dim light from the hallway. Time seemed to slow down and speed up simultaneously. Allison's brain couldn't process what she was seeing. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. People don't hurt children, especially not 6-year-old little girls who never hurt anyone. But it was real. A primal maternal instinct overrode everything else. Allison didn't think, didn't calculate, didn't consider her own safety. She launched herself at him and tore him away from her child with strength born of desperation. She grabbed his arm, the one holding the knife, and pulled with everything she had. As she pulled him back, he turned to her. His eyes were strange, distant, not the eyes of someone she recognized. There was something vacant there, something that seemed to look through her rather than at her, and he muttered disturbing words. "God told me," he said. "She was evil. I had to stop her. God commanded it." Allison didn't care what he was saying. She just fought to get the knife away, fought to keep him away from her baby. The struggle was violent and chaotic. They crashed into furniture. She clawed at his face, his arms, anywhere she could reach. She punched and kicked with every ounce of strength she possessed. She screamed for help, screamed for Nolan, who was in his room, screamed for neighbors, for anyone. But Tribble Cox was relentless. After briefly breaking free from her grip, he attempted to return to the bunk bed, to Lauren, when Allison intervened again. Throwing herself between him and her daughter, something shifted in him. He turned the knife on himself. In a violent outburst that left blood splattered everywhere, he began inflicting serious injuries on his own body. He stabbed himself in the chest, making wounds that should have stopped him but didn't. He stabbed himself in the abdomen, deep wounds that would require surgery later, but in that moment seemed to only fuel his frenzy. It was horrific. Blood everywhere, him making sounds that were barely human, and through it all, Allison kept trying to get to Lauren. She finally broke away from the struggle and turned to her daughter. Her baby girl was completely still, unresponsive. Blood soaked the sheets. Allison scooped her up, cradling her small body. Lauren felt so light, so fragile. Allison's hands were shaking. She ran out of the room, down the hallway, through the front door. She laid Lauren on the grass, away from the chaos, away from him, and she tried everything she knew. She'd been a nurse for years. She knew CPR. She knew first aid. She checked for a pulse. Nothing. She started chest compressions, counting out loud. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. The rhythm she'd practiced countless times on dummies, never imagining she'd be doing it on her own daughter. "Come on, baby. Wake up. Please wake up." Nothing. Lauren showed no signs of response. Her lips were turning blue. Allison kept trying. She refused to stop. She pushed and breathed and begged and prayed. She made deals with God. "Take me instead. Please. Just not her. Not my baby." But Lauren didn't wake up. The sound of Allison's desperate screams pierced the morning quiet. It was still dark, that dead hour before dawn when the world is quietest. But her screams changed that. Lights began to flick on in neighboring houses. Someone called 911. Within minutes, though it felt like hours, police and paramedics arrived. They found Allison on the lawn, frantically trying to revive her daughter, blood covering her hands and clothes, refusing to give up even as hope slipped away. The officers had to gently pull her away so paramedics could take over. She fought them at first, not wanting to leave her baby, but they insisted. The paramedics needed room to work. They tried everything: advanced life support, medications, defibrillation. They intubated her, trying to get oxygen into her system. They set up IV lines, pumping fluids, but some things can't be fixed. Some injuries are too severe. Lauren Sylvia Belius was pronounced dead at the scene at 4:17 a.m. The cause of death would later be determined to be asphyxiation and trauma. She'd been strangled and stabbed, a 6-year-old child, subjected to a level of violence that's almost impossible to comprehend. Inside the house, the scene was grisly. Blood everywhere, on the walls, the floor, the furniture, evidence of a violent struggle. And in the middle of it all stood David Tribble Cox, visibly injured. In a highly disturbed state, he'd injured himself so severely that he needed immediate medical attention. But there was no attempt to lie, no resistance, no denial. When police officers entered, weapons drawn, shouting commands, David simply stood there, covered in blood, his own and Lauren's, still holding the knife. When questioned, David made an immediate confession. He didn't ask for a lawyer, didn't claim not to remember, didn't try to blame anyone else. He said God had commanded him. He said Lauren was evil. He said it was a holy mission, like Abraham being commanded to sacrifice Isaac, except he'd actually followed through. His explanations became more bizarre as officers tried to get a coherent statement. He claimed to be acting under divine instruction. He said the child was possessed by demons, that she was a threat to humanity, that God had chosen him specifically for this task because of his righteousness. He told police that his mission wasn't over. If the child had somehow survived, he would have tried again. God had given him a job to do, and he would have seen it through. Yet in a jarring contradiction, he also acknowledged earthly consequences. I deserve to go to prison for the rest of my life, he told one officer. I know what I did was wrong by human laws. It was a strange statement, an acknowledgement of guilt wrapped in claims of divine mission. The rambling continued as he was taken to the hospital for treatment of his self-inflicted wounds. He repeated his story to paramedics, to emergency room staff, to psychiatrists who came to evaluate him. He had been chosen for this task, he insisted. It was terrible, but necessary. God speaks to those who are willing to listen, and he had listened. He had transformed, seemingly overnight, from helpful family man into self-proclaimed prophet, whose first supposed divine message led to the death of a 6-year-old child. The question wasn't whether David Tribble Cox had killed Lauren Belius. The question was, did he know what he was doing? Did he understand it was wrong? Was he criminally responsible? In New York, as in most states, there's a legal standard for insanity. It's not enough to be mentally ill. You have to be so impaired that you either couldn't understand the nature of your actions or couldn't understand that what you were doing was wrong. The legal proceedings began, but this would not be a typical murder trial. Tribble Cox waived his right to a jury trial. This decision meant that the verdict would rest solely with Judge Michael L. Dwyer, a veteran jurist known for his careful, methodical approach to complex cases. Some speculated that Tribble Cox's lawyers made this choice because they feared a jury would be too emotionally swayed by the horrific nature of the crime. A judge, they reasoned, would be more likely to consider the psychiatric evidence objectively. The central question wasn't whether he'd killed Lauren. His confessions and the physical evidence made that undeniable. Instead, the trial would hinge entirely on his state of mind at the time of the killing. Was David Tribble Cox